In this video, we will be discussing my updated 2024 presidential election prediction between Joe Biden, the incumbent president, and Donald Trump, the former president of the United States. Now, a lot has changed in the past couple of weeks. We saw the entire turmoil with the Republicans unable to unite behind a speaker after ousting Kevin McCarthy, and I think there's a lot of interesting things to look at in today's video. Now let's start off with the safe states vote in. Joe Biden at 181 electoral votes and Donald Trump at 113 electoral votes. Let's get started. Let's start off with Donald Trump's likely states because he is behind in the electoral vote count. Alaska and South Carolina are two obvious states that come to mind when we talk about Donald Trump's likely Republican states. Both of these states voted for Donald Trump by about 10 to 12 points in 2020, and they're going to vote for him by similar margins in 2024. Now going to the next two likely Republican states, going to be the states of Iowa and Ohio. Both of these states voted for Trump by around 8 points. Both of them are quite identical in terms of some of the trends. They're trending heavily towards the Republican Party, especially trending towards Donald Trump, as Republicans were able to do very well in both these states in the rural regions, as Trump was able to do very well with working class voters. Now going to the next state, the state of Texas. Texas voted for Donald Trump by 5.6 points over Joe Biden in 2020. I expect a similar margin for him in 2024. We said in 2020, Republicans did very well in some of these Hispanic regions. Joe Biden overperformed in many of these suburban counties. Overall, the state did trend to the Democratic Party, and I think in 2024, the state will remain somewhat static, with Republicans continuing to overperform in some of these Hispanic regions, while Democrats continue to overperform in some of these suburban regions. Now going to the next likely Republican state, the state of Florida. The state of Florida, I do expect also to be in the likely Republican column. We do see that from the shift in 2016, Miami-Dade County shifted 22 points to Republicans compared to 2016 and 2020. That is very much remarkable because this state was used to be a very competitive state, right? In 2000, for instance, George W. Bush won the state over Al Gore by just 537 votes out of more than 5 million votes cast. Now the state of Florida has become a remarkably red state, with Trump being able to defeat Joe Biden there by 3.3 points in 2020, and Ron DeSantis, the incumbent Republican governor of the state of Florida, being able to win by 16 percentage points in 2022. Now going to the final likely Republican district, Maine second. I'm just going to characterize that. Nothing to talk about there. This is a pretty Republican district as well. Now, Joe Biden's likely states, Colorado, New Mexico, Virginia. All of these states voted for Joe Biden by at least 10 points. Virginia and Colorado are heavily trending blue. New Mexico is kind of static, maybe trending slightly to the Republican Party with some of the oil workers in that state. Now, going to the state of Maine as well, likely for the Democratic Party. I think the state of Minnesota as well going to be likely for the Democratic Party. Joe Biden won the state there by 7 points against Donald Trump. I think the margin was going to more or less hold. If you look at the shift from 2016, you see Minneapolis, you see these counties shifting heavily to the Democratic Party. That's really not much of a surprise. We see that Democrats have been consistently doing better with white educated voters, and that's a heavily dominant group in the state of Minnesota. Now going to the state of New Hampshire, again a similar story here. White college graduated voters, these are states that are heavily trending blue. We see that in similar states in the neighboring states, right? In the New England in general, we see Democrats have been able to consistently overperform their past performances because white educated voters are trending to the Democratic Party. In a couple of decades, New Hampshire will probably end up being a solidly blue state, probably by the end of the 2030s. Now going to some of these final states, these are where I believe the election will be truly competitive in. But let's first get off Nebraska's 2nd Congressional District. This is probably going to be a lean Democratic district. Joe Biden won that district there by 7 points in 2020. The district is drawn to be slightly more Republican leaning, but nonetheless this will still be a Democratic leaning district. First off, in the state of Nevada. Nevada in 2020 voted for Joe Biden by 2.4 points. Now, previously, I did say that I believe the state of Nevada will be trending to the Republican Party in 2024. That opinion has since changed. First off, we saw with all that House Speaker chaos where Republicans failed to pretty much unite behind any candidate. Kevin McCarthy got ousted by the more extreme wing of the Republican Party, and then more moderate mainstream Republicans ended up blocking Jim Jordan's bid. So it's kind of chaotic in the Republican Party, which really questions the Republicans' ability to unite behind Donald Trump in 2024. He's pretty much the presumptive nominee, and I think many Republicans are never Trump. They're not going to vote for him. Now, you might say that's a small segment of the Republican Party. It is. But ultimately, those are the voters that ultimately decide presidential elections. If they are not able to turn out for Donald Trump, he will lose. And in the state of Nevada, for instance, we do see that some of these voters in Las Vegas, for example, if Trump drops below 44%, he's pretty much guaranteed to lose the state, and that's what I think will happen. Republicans are not going to be able to turn out those Republican voters that voted for Trump in 2020, but may not be as inclined to vote for him in 2024. I think Joe Biden will probably win the state of Nevada. Now going to the state of Arizona. We do see that in the state of Arizona, Joe Biden defeated Donald Trump there by 0.3 percentage points. Now, that's a pretty competitive margin, but if we look at some of the trends, the largest two counties in the state by far, Maricopa and Pima County, both trended 5 points to the Democratic Party. We do see that trends are favoring Democrats in the state of Arizona, as well as most of the Sun Belt. Suburbanites are trending to the Democratic Party, especially white suburbanites, and ultimately those are the type of voters that Democrats will be improving in the next couple of decades. Generally speaking, I do believe Democrats are probably favored in the state of Arizona because they were able to win it in 2020. Nothing would suggest they won't be able to win the state in 2024. Now going to the state of Georgia. Georgia is a very, very competitive state. We do see that Joe Biden in 2020 barely secured the state over Donald John Trump. Now, if we look at some of the shifts here, the Atlantic region shifted heavily to the Democratic Party, and that's where the vast majority of the voters in the state are located. The rural areas overall trended slightly to Republicans, but nothing significant. We see trends on both sides. Now, the Atlanta region ultimately shifted the state in favor of the Democratic Party by more than 5 points. This was previous a state in 2016 that voted for Trump by 5.4 percentage points and then flipped for Joe Biden. In fact, in 2008, for instance, John McCain was able to win the state by a larger margin than Trump was in 2020. And then Trump was in 2016, and obviously the state flipped in 2020. The state has been heavily trending blue, and I think that streak will ultimately maintain itself. So I do believe Joe Biden will be able to probably win the state of Georgia. Now going to the state of North Carolina here. Going to the state of North Carolina, Donald Trump was able to win the state in 2020 by a margin of 1.3 percentage points. Now, Democrats have been able to consistently overperform in some of the Charlotte regions, as well as the Wake County region, as well as some of the counties surrounding Greensboro, specifically the Democratic-leaning ones. Republicans have been generally able to overperform in the rural areas, as well as some of the rural black areas bordering the state of Virginia. Now, overall speaking, I do believe that the state is slightly trending to the Democratic Party, though it's very, very tough to say. The trends in the state are mostly static because Democrats are going to overperform in some of these more liberal areas, and Republicans are going to be overperforming some of the more conservative areas, as well as some of the rural black counties in this part of the state. Overall, the state is, as I mentioned, trending pretty much to no party. In 2024, I think the Democrats will really fight to win the state, but I don't think it's going to be enough. I think Republicans will have just enough turnout to be ultimately able to maintain the state of North Carolina to the Republican Party. Now going to the state of Wisconsin. The state of Wisconsin voted for Joe Biden by about 0.63% in 2020. That's a remarkably small margin, right? It's a margin that can easily flip. Now, previously, I did maintain that Republicans will probably be able to flip the state of Wisconsin. Now, however, I don't think so. Again, we're talking about these moderate voters who may have even supported Trump in 2016, may have supported Trump in 2020, but I just don't think that with the Republican Party's division, that Republicans will be able to turn out enough voters in the wild counties. Now, these are counties like Waukesha, for instance. More than 260,000 votes was cast in this county and trended 6 points to the Democratic Party. Had the state had the same margin of victory for Republicans, Trump alone would have been able to net about 15,000 votes out of this county alone, which will pretty much make the state pretty much a tie in the popular vote, right? These are counties, the three counties here, Waukesha, Washington, and Okazi County. These are three counties that ultimately matter a lot to Republicans if they want any chances of winning the state. And these are counties where there's some moderate voters who may not support someone like Trump, especially with a party division. I think Trump needs to unite the Republican Party, and again, although he's probably going to get somewhere around 70% of the Republican primary vote, that means still 30% of voters are still gonna end up opposing him in the primary. And although I think that 90% of Republicans will be able to vote for someone like Trump, that 10% may be able to enough to sway the entire election. After all, elections in the US are very competitive, especially on the presidential level, and those slight amount of voters who are just not going to back their own party makes a huge difference. Now going to the state of Michigan here. I think this is a state out of the three Rust Belt states: Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. This is the state that's the most liberal leaning. Now, the state voted for Joe Biden by around 3 points in 2020. And if we look at some of the trends here, Democrats have been able to do better in some of the suburban regions, but the rural areas are still trending to the Republican Party. The big problem for the Republicans here is that the rural areas have a much smaller population compared to some of the urban and suburban regions, so overall, Democrats did improve in 2020. And I think the margin will remain somewhat static in 2024 because I think Democrats will be able to consistently overperform in some of these suburban areas by slight margins, but I think Republicans will be able to also improve in some of the rural areas and end up running up turnout because Trump is very good at running up turnout in the rural regions, especially in the Rust Belt in a state, for example, like the state of Michigan. So overall, a similar margin as to 2020. Now finally going to the state of Pennsylvania. Now previously, I said that the state will probably decide the election. As of right now, Joe Biden has already won the presidency. But in the state of Pennsylvania, we see that Democrats did end up overperforming in some of these counties surrounding Philadelphia, the Philadelphia suburbs, as well as some of the exurbs outside of the Philadelphia region, with the exception of Philadelphia, which actually trended to the Republican Party. Now, the state is pretty much determined on two things. Essentially, how much turnout is in the rural regions, because these are heavily Republican-leaning counties, and also how many voters turn out for Democrats, and by what margin Democrats are able to win the suburban regions. Now, I think Joe Biden will be probably be able to run up some of the numbers in the suburban regions like he did in 2020. For example, in Chester County, Joe Biden was able to overperform Hillary Clinton by more than 7 points. Delaware County, more than 4 points. Montgomery County, 5 points. And Bucks County, more than 3 percentage points. These are areas that Joe Biden, in my opinion, will probably be able to run up the numbers. Now, I think Trump will be able to counter that by running up some of the margins in the rural regions. Overall, I think that the state will ultimately vote for Joe Biden by around 1.5 to 2 percentage points because I do believe that ultimately suburban counties and how they shift blue will ultimately outpower any of the Republican-leaning shifts in the rural regions. So therefore, this is the Electoral College map. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day. Goodbye.